Inside the abandoned remains of Italy's most haunted villa. In the woods near Lake Como, a playground for the rich in northern Italy, a once lavish villa crumbles into ruin. Some call it the Red House thanks to its now crumbling paint job, and others the House of Witches. But it is best known as the Ghost Mansion. And on a dark night, you can imagine phantoms flitting through the broken-down manse. Once the summer home of a count, who gave it its official name, the Villa de Vecchia, now it houses only ghosts. Locals say that if you listen closely you can still hear them tinkle on the old piano. Apparently, the ghosts are said to be restless spirits provoked by tragedy. For the Villa de Vecchia has a history of rumor about murder, suicide, and even satanic rituals and orgies. Altogether, these combine to leave this ruined mansion, left to the elements since the 1960s, as perhaps Italy's most haunted house. But the true story of the Red House, although perhaps more prosaic than the myths, is fascinating. There are answers to the questions: who built it, what happened to the aristocrats who owned it, and possibly even why people believe it is haunted. Ever since the Romans ruled Italy, the Lake Como area has been a favorite not just for the rich, but for tourists too. The latter flock to this part of Italy, deep in the region of Lombardy, to indulge their love of art and culture. And one piece of that culture was the Villa de Vecchia, built by Count Felix de Vecchia, an Italian aristocrat. The place that Count Felix de Vecchia chose for his lavish home was Cortenova. This small town lies a few miles north of the city of Lecco. It sits in the hills to the east of the lake, with the house itself down a lonely road. For its part, the house has stood in Cortenova for more than 160 years. Its construction began in 1854, and it would take 3 years to finish. For the Count de Vecchia, Cortenova was the perfect place to have his summer residence. To help the Count create his dream home, he enlisted the architect Alessandro Sidoli. De Vecchia wanted the residence to resemble the buildings that he had seen traveling in the East when younger. However, in the first of what some would see in later days as a train of bad omens attached to the home, Sidoli would not see it finished. That's because he sadly passed a year in advance of completion. Nevertheless, the villa would become a fine summer residence for the Count and his family. De Vecchia's love for the East had been kindled on a long journey that he took in his 20s. He and buddy Gaetano Osculati had traveled through Turkey and what was then Persia to India, returning via Egypt. And he didn't just sightsee, he also kept a detailed journal and drew many of the things and places that he came across. Once back in his native city of Milan, De Vecchia again started to feel the urge to travel. So he set off around Europe, visiting France, Holland, and the UK. And after he married in 1844, he took off on a honeymoon. He and his new wife, Carolina Franchetti de Ponte, toured throughout Italy. The Count's drawings and writings about the places that he saw drew some notice, leading him to return to some fame when he came back to Milan. In particular, he had shown a love of the mountains, so it was no surprise that he wanted the Grigny group of peaks to form the backdrop for his summer home. On top of his love of Italy's scenery, De Vecchia had a patriotic dedication to the Risorgimento, the movement to unite the nation of Italy. He struggled against the Austrians in the cause of unification, at one point being forced into exile from Milan. A united Italy was, though, still a dream when De Vecchia's home at Cortenova was built. The villa sat in parkland that spanned more than 1 million square feet, adorned by gardens and walkways. And amidst this greenery, partygoers would frolic through the summer nights. Nearby, he built a house for staff that would also stun observers. Inside, the villa sported the best that the day could offer. Pipes in the walls kept the home warm, common today but a novelty for the 1850s. Serving hatches allowed food to be transported up from the kitchens. Ornate and finely worked frescoes decorated both ceilings and walls of the home, which showed touches in Eastern and Baroque styles. In the main sitting room, an enormous fireplace would keep out the chill rolling off the mountains. Even today, from the ruins it's clear what a stunning home the Villa de Vecchi must have made. The de Vecchis lived in it during the warmer months of the year, escaping to the hills from Milan as the temperature rose into the 80s. Rumor and legend swirl around the Count, making it difficult to discern what really happened to him and his family. But it's said that one day in 1862 he came back to the villa to find his wife horribly killed. Worse, his young daughter had disappeared and was nowhere to be found. The story continues that the Count searched the forests of Corte-Nova for weeks afterwards, hoping to find his daughter. But he had no luck, and racked with the pain of losing her, he would end his own life. However, it seems that the true story of Felix de Vecchi is a little less dramatic. Struggling with liver disease and caring for his sons, he split his time between Milan and his summer house. He passed away at his Milan home in 1862, aged only 46. On the Count's demise, the villa was inherited by his brother Biago. For his part, it seems that the latter was not a great lover of the East. He would by the end of the 1860s have ripped out a lot of the house's oriental features. The villa would, despite the changes, stay in the de Vecchi family for many decades. They lived there right up until the 1940s. During that time, the family had had to abandon the second floor of the home, as leakage from the heating pipes had caused too much damage to make using the upstairs viable. Finally, the last of the de Vecchis left the property, and the descendants of Biago put it up for sale. But 20 years of being passed from hand to hand left it unloved and eventually abandoned. Perhaps the building would have faded into total obscurity if it wasn't for one name that has become connected to it. The Satanist Aleister Crowley is supposed to have stayed for a handful of nights in the 1920s. Among his cavortings, Crowley famously loved to indulge in sexual rituals involving the color red. So it is apt that it's claimed that he performed some at the villa, given its nickname of the Red House. That uncertainty didn't prevent Crowley's fans from visiting, though. And along with them came a host of stories about the wilder side of the cult surrounding him. Orgies, sacrifices and all sorts of witchcraft and devilry formed the substance of a host of rumors that arose about what the Satanists' followers had done at the villa. Meanwhile, whatever the truth of that, the home still attracts phantom chasers. And they're quite sure that there is something haunting about the villa. But the building itself is uncared for and gradually sliding into total ruin. From the outside, the building has kept some of its charm, and from a distance, the decay is not immediately visible. Closer up though, the ravages of nature become more noticeable. The paint has worn away and become patchy, and where once there were windows, now holes gape in the facade. Sadly, the once glorious fountain has disappeared, although that may be a blessing since legend has it that it began to pour out blood. The grounds are still picturesque, with the setting among the mountains inspiring the sense of romance that intrigued Count de Vecchi in the first place. Inside, rubble litters the floors as the walls and ceilings begin to crumble. Meanwhile, the delightful frescoes have become largely hidden from view, as vandals have covered every surface with graffiti. Of course, now that the home is abandoned, there are no furnishings. Yes, somehow the piano became broken into bits. Local people say, though, that you can hear the old songs drifting from the house as a specter runs its ghostly fingers across the ivories. More gruesomely, some say you can, if you listen closely, hear the screams resulting from the evil deeds of Crowley's dark following. Meanwhile, the mystery of this haunted house was only boosted in 2002 when disaster struck the Corte-Nova region. An avalanche sent massive rocks tumbling down the mountainside, crushing the houses that stood nearby. Despite the wild rumor that floats around about the villa, one man has a more mundane explanation for the ghost stories. Giuseppe Negri is the descendant of men who had been gardeners at the villa, and he himself had a childhood spent on the property. Negri revealed to Atlas Obscura in 2018 that he had been the ghost. He said, "The reality is there are no ghosts, the ghost was me." As a youngster, Negri had donned a bedsheet and roamed the villa's environs to scare people who had been lured by the Crowley story. Negri explained that the tale about the occultist was nonsense, but those who had come to the house in his supposed footsteps had damaged the place. "It's all crap made up by crazy people," he explained. While Negri had waited by a door, his brother-in-law had concealed himself upstairs. Then the latter had driven visitors towards Negri, who chuckled when he recounted what happened next. "Bam!" he cried. And as he recounted the sounds of their boots on the floorboards as they skedaddled, he noted, it was a blast. Their fate was, however, gentler than that of a man who had worked for Negri. As he explained to Atlas Obscura, he had stumbled across his employee in the house at night. Then he had lashed out, punching the man in the face. Negri told Atlas Obscura that he could no longer bear to see the house in its here-trending state. He said, "To me it was heaven on earth, and I want to remember it like that." Indeed, the graffiti makes it obvious that people do visit the house, despite the signs warning against trespassing. But padlocks and boards now keep people out, apparently to help them keep safe. At one point, an upper floor collapsed, injuring a woman who had been upstairs. One visitor to the house was photographer Jeff Kerwin. He had been attracted to the architecture of a bygone age and the charm that the villa still has. And from his words to the Daily Mail in 2018, it's clear that he at least believes the ghost stories have some truth.